be sort of on camera for recording, that's totally fine. You can just turn your cameras off. Also, we do have folks here monitoring the chat. So if you have a question that you want to ask to the panel, that's totally fine. You can go ahead and ask it through the chat. And I think that they can just chat Jenna or Malika Bella maybe and say, hey, if you have a sort of a question that you don't want read in front of everybody, we'll read your question, but not your name. So anyway, thank you all for being here with us. I'm really excited about this panel, and I'm going to do some sort of brief introductions of our panelists here, and then I'm going to kind of get out of the way and let you all take the show. So we'll start with Dr. Crittenden right here. Dr. Alyssa Crittenden is an associate professor and the graduate coordinator for the UNLV Department of Anthropology. As an anthropologist who studies the relationship between human behavior and the environment, she seeks to better understand the links between diet, reproduction, growth and development, and maternal, infant, and child health and behavior. Most of her research has been done in collaboration with the Hadza of Tanzania, East Africa, one of the world's last remaining hunting and gathering populations, a group she's worked with since 2004. So thank you so much for being here with us, Dr. Crittenden. Next up, we have Cameron Lusang. He's the interim assistant dean of admissions and financial aid at the UNLV Boys School of Law. He earned his JD from Golden Gate University School of Law and his BA in journalism and mass communication from the Walter Cronkite School at Arizona State University. Immediately prior to joining the Boyd School of Law, he was the director of admissions at Golden Gate University School of Law and was an assistant director of admissions at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law in New York City. He is licensed to practice law in California. Next up is Dr. Kelly Mays. Dr. Mays is an associate professor and director of graduate studies in the UNLV Department of English, of which I'm an alum, I'll add. A specialist in 19th century British literature and the history of the novel. Professor Mays earned her doctorate at Stanford University and taught in the Harvard Expository Writing Program and at New Mexico State University before coming to UNLV. And last but not least in any way is Dr. Jennifer Reynolds. She is a professor in the psychology department and graduate coordinator of the psychological and brain sciences PhD program. She's a developmental psychologist who investigates how early social experiences influence infants and children's perception of people based on gender, race, and attractiveness. Her research provides insight on the development of biases and stereotypes and how people process information about others. So as you can see, we have a great panel here today. And I want to say before we jump into some questions, if anybody's not exactly clear what graduate coordinators do and what sort of their role is, they are sort of designated points of contact for programs. They're also very much involved in the application review process. So these are the folks that you want to be reaching out to if you're interested in their programs. And they can tell you about things that they're looking for in applications. We're going to ask them some of that today. And so we'll just sort of go from there. So I think it's okay. We'll start here at this end of the table with Dr. Reynolds and just sort of move down with this first question. So how do you know when a program is the best fit for you?
I think there's a couple of things. One, at least for our program, we have a mentor-student model, and so you need to have a really good fit with that mentor. And if you find that what the mentor's research is, what the research the mentor is doing is a good fit with you, that's one thing. If you also feel like there might be other faculty who have research that's of interest, or could contribute to that, I think that's also a plus. I also think it's really important to look for collegiality in a department. And I know, for example, our developmental area of study, we're very collegial and we work together. And I think that that's a real draw for students as well.
Awesome, awesome.
My answer will be slightly different, and I have to admit, I forgot to look at the question. I know that because my friend and colleague to my right, I cheated off of her question. So don't do that. That's my first piece of advice. Always come prepared. But so much of my life is about graduate admissions and graduate programming right now that I can answer this one very easily. You were right. You were right. Dr. Mays was right. I have it right here. My biggest piece of advice also would be to look at the type of program you're applying to. So oftentimes for many programs in social sciences, you are applying to work with a particular advisor and not necessarily that program. And if that particular advisor is not taking students, which happens very often in our Department of Anthropology, then that's not a good fit from the outset. So I think that everything that was just said is absolutely spot on. So I know it's cheating to say I second all of that, but I do. But I also, yeah, I would just say to look for someone who you think would be a very good mentor that is doing the type of research that you want to do. Not necessarily the exact same thing, but that their expertise falls in line with your expertise and they are in fact accepting students. That would be my nugget.
And now I'm going to contradict everything. It was just,
It's just, that's okay, that's good,
So
that's good.
So again, in English, I think also in history and certain other liberal arts disciplines, it's not that kind of advisor model and taking students and you're not applying to work with a certain person. So in fact, I actually encourage people to look at a department as a whole and not to fixate on one particular faculty member. That's because I have actually seen students, when I was a graduate student, come to a program because of one faculty person who then left, or who it turned out that they didn't want to work with. So anyway, it's just a different
That
model.
does happen, and
So-
that's pretty terrible.
But
So
this
yeah.
but it's also just a sign that you need to know about your discipline, right? You need to know about your discipline and how it works and how graduate programs work in your discipline and your field. That's just what this is a real example of.
Yep.
More generally, I would say you need to be thinking about two things. One, you actually need to be thinking about what are your priorities, what are your needs, what are your goals, what is the kind of environment in which you flourish. This is crucially important because that's what fit is about, right? On the other hand, you really need to do your homework. Right? You really need to investigate the programs and the departments that you're thinking of applying to. You want to look at what the requirements actually are. I'm often shocked when students come in and they're like, oh, there's a language requirement. I'm like, did you read the catalog? And again, I'm not upset with them, but I'm like, why did you walk into something that had expectations that you didn't, right? I mean, anyway, so make sure you know the requirements, coursework, and other requirements. There will also be other kinds of requirements in graduate school. You also want to know things like, here are the courses that are required in the catalog, but what are they actually offering? Because they're not always the same. And so you want to get a sense of what courses are they actually offering? What does the funding look like? How does it work in nitty-gritty detail? What kinds of opportunities are given to graduate students in that department? You want to really do your homework. I would also, I'm going to go back to collegiality. You want to be getting a sense of what the department is like. And for that, I mean, you want to look at the catalog, you want to look at handbooks from the programs you're interested in, but you also ideally want to talk to people. Including, if you're interested in graduate school, you should be identifying and talking to a range of faculty mentors here now. You should be feeling them out about what programs and departments are like. They might have some insight. But then if you're really interested in a program or department, you should be talking to the grad coordinator. You can also ask to talk to graduate students who are actually in the program. Anyway, so those are the kind of the two things, but you also need to be thinking about what you need, right? And what kind of environment you flourish in and trying to make that fit too. What are your financial needs? What kind of place do you need to live? Do you have a family? Do you have children? Thinking about that too, because it is about fit.
And my colleagues, great tips and advice. Slightly different for law school. So what's a good, I tell often to applicants and those interested in the law that we are problem solvers, right? We solve our clients. So if you like to solve problems, solving their legal problems or business problems or family problems and coming to some type of solution, I think law school can be a good fit, right? We're always trying to solve problems. But about, research, like when we have applicants that come to us and they have, what's the LSAT? Right? That's one of the major requirements to get into law school. And it surprises me because lawyers, we're asked to do so many things. We have so much credibility and it's such a profession that's, that I think is hopefully is esteemed that people come to us to really solve their problems. So if you can't, you call us and you're like, what's the LSAT? First goes off our mind, well, you didn't read our website, which we spend a ton of time like really building out. So to go back to the question though, the program's a good fit. If you're naturally curious, I think a lot of graduate programs, you want to keep asking questions and question, the status quo, particularly when it comes to a lot of, public policy or rules of law. I think that's a good fit. If you And I mean, the law runs the gamut. A lot of students think everything is criminal law, what they see on SVU. But in fact, we don't take a class called criminal justice in law school. You take criminal law, which talks about the elements of crimes. One of them being like, homicide and inchoate crimes and stuff like that. But then that's the only criminal law class that you're actually required to take at most law schools. Everything else is not necessarily related to crimes. So the law is very vast. It touches upon every facet of life. So whether it's constitutional law, whether it's contracts, evidence, torts, civil procedure. So those are kind of the first year courses you take. So if you're naturally curious, you like to solve problems for your clients. If you like to write, we do a lot of writing, and legal writing is far different than any other type of writing, particularly in the liberal arts. It's a different type of writing. It's very formulaic, it's boring, it's not creative. So I said, if you like to research and write and advocate, I think it's a potential fit.
Great, thank you all so much. So I think you all have sort of brought up a couple of things. So I'm going to jump around on our question list a little bit here. Because I think that all of you in sort of your answer to the previous question, we're sort of talking about the kinds of preparation that people need to do before they're ready to apply to grad school. And if it's okay, we'll just sort of move one down the line. So we'll start with you on this one, Dr. Crittenden, and then we'll go down the line and we'll come back to Dr. Reynolds. So what makes somebody a strong applicant? When you're sort of looking at applications, when you're talking to people who are interested in the program, what kinds of things are you looking for, and what really makes something stand out to you to be like, hey, I think this is somebody that would be not only a good fit here, but a good student here for us?
That's a good question. I want to rewind a little bit, if that's okay, because I think it was a great first question, which is how do you know essentially fit for that program? But we haven't talked about fit for graduate research in general or an advanced degree in general. So I want to kind of speak to that first and then move on to what I think would be a good student, because I think they're related. I can't say anything about getting a JD, so I'm gonna have to defer to you on that one. So we're just gonna like put a little pause button on that so that you can jump in on that. But as far as a PhD goes, it's a lot of work. It's an immense amount of work, and you sacrifice a lot of other things on the altar of that degree and that education. And I always joke and say, I just gave up my 20s to my graduate career. I tried to chase them again in my 30s, and it did not work out. But you really are, life is about trade-offs, and you need to really want it. It needs to be something that you see yourself doing, not just the Peter Pan syndrome where you can't figure out what you want to do when you grow up, so you're just gonna go to grad school. Sometimes that works out well. I think more often than not, it does not work out well. So I think the number one thing is to make sure that you really do want to pursue this degree. That when you think about yourself in 15 years and 20 years, you see yourself in some type of profession that has required that degree to be successful or to advance. So I think that comes out when you're looking for a good fit. When we are looking at interviews, students who are interviewing, we're meeting students face-to-face, we're looking for that drive and that true desire to be in that program and do everything that it takes to go from one step to the next step to the next step. And it's that mysterious thing that we can't really label. My undergraduate advisor, when I said, well, I think I want to go to graduate school, I think I want to get a PhD. I remember she said, oh, yep, I think that would be good for you. You have that fire in the belly. And I said, what is the fire in the belly? I still don't know what it is all these years later, but I'm getting a better idea as a graduate coordinator, having my own students, mentoring my own graduate students, kind of being in the game long enough now. I think that it changes. What that fire in the belly means for you or for that program is very different, but you need to have that desire to be uncomfortable and to do those really the challenging work that it takes to be in that program. We'll talk about funding later because that was an excellent point, but also just pause on that because I think we really do need to come back to that.
We have a question about that, so stay tuned, everybody.
Yeah, again, I want to build on and complicate that a little bit because I do think the fire and the passion are key, but it's a fire and a passion that are also, you demonstrate that you are informed about what the work is actually going to be like and what, right? So I think about, again, as an English department, one thing I tell students when they're doing statements of purpose, for example, sit down and think there are X number of other applicants. What is everybody going to say? As someone who has read a lot of applications to graduate school, all of them are going to say, I have loved books, right? And again, I want somebody who loves books and reading, that's not a question, but it's like, what makes you distinctive? And what do you want to do with books? What is your approach to literature? Also in English, again, in the other disciplines, there are many different fields, right? So what actual field are you interested in, right? And again, it's also different, we can talk about this, because you left me, we're talking about PhD. Also the MA, there are other degrees, and there's some difference in that, right? So an MA is not a specialist degree, so you don't have to have so much of a specialist focus, but by the time you're applying to a terminal degree program, like an MFA or a PhD, we're really looking like you have a sense that you're informed kind of about, right? And you have some sense of not just, I love literature, but like, what's your field? What is your approach? At the PhD level, you might often, it's even good if you maybe brought an idea about what your project might be, like a particular author, you know. So I would say it's both passion and drive, but also passion and drive that are built on information, that, you know, that it's informed, that you're passionate about what you're actually going to be doing. Right.
And going off, it's a lot of work for the JD as well. I mean, in terms of the amount of reading, you know, I remember my first semester, I took criminal law, and you 15 credit hours right in your first semester, and criminal law meant twice a week for an hour, and I think 15 or 30 minutes for each class. And the teacher said read pages between 100 and 250 by the next class, on top of my 4 other classes, right? And it takes you a very long time to get through a lot of these cases, judges don't write that well. Right? They're not good writers. So we try to, you know, it's hard to read through that. It doesn't come across naturally. So just be prepared for, given, you know, especially the first year of law school, a lot of time. In the second and third year, it gets a little easier, but it's still difficult, and you get, you know, used to the rigor. But just prepared for, it's a lot of work. I think, professional degree, whether it's a PhD, an MD, a JD, it's a lot of work. It's different. It's completely different than an undergraduate program. Just to be prepared for that. I also want to mention too that we often have, we don't have majors or minors in law, so that's something that's different than other programs. We teach you that the degree leads to the program leads to a Juris Doctor, and that's the degree. So there's no major, or there's no minor. We do have concentrations, but they're not necessary, or even, I don't think that important, right? You take the first year of law school, you take the foundational course that you would take at every law school, including Boyd, and then your second, third year are mostly electives. So it's a couple more requirements, but you choose from many of the electives, and even though they may be in our catalog, they may not be offered during that semester because we're a small law school, right? So yeah, so
5 years.
yeah, so the second and third year is really what you want to choose, and I suggest that students really get experiential learning. So working one of our esteemed clinics here on campus, or working out in the field, right? Working for the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada, working for the DAs or the public defenders, working for grassroots government agencies, or working in private law firms. Really getting your hands, putting your classroom knowledge to work and helping and advocating for your clients. That's more powerful than any classroom can teach you. And take some bar courses so you're prepared for the bar exam as well.
I liked all these answers. And I also just want to bring up research experience is often something we're looking for in our applicants. And that can be in many different ways, and it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly in the field yet or area of study they're applying to. Really what we're looking for is that they've had some experience like asking questions, collecting data, maybe some learning some statistical expertise, and have gone through some of the stages of the research process. With that said, we're also quite aware that some individuals come from institutions that don't necessarily have a strong research program. And so some students have applied, but they have done things like internships and then they talk about, how they've gone out and helped, make change with this group or whatever, and you see the drive there. And you can also see it from, say, a letter of recommendation from the person who oversaw the internship that, wow, this student just set out and met all these goals and, really exceeded our expectations, and things like that are something great to see in someone. And that's kind of getting at this notion of this drive, even if it wasn't completely related to the research that they're conducting. And so those are the types of things that I look for in when I'm looking at their letters of recommendation as well as their personal statement. And even just things like inquiry, that I was in this class, and this went up and it got me really curious about X, and that's what you want to be, as someone who wants to conduct research, someone who sees something, learns something, and says, wow, that's really interesting. I want to learn more about it. I want to understand this better. And I think that having something like that is something I really seek in a student.
Thank you all, and I'll just add very briefly, I talk to people who want to do degrees all day long. This is my job. And I tell them a lot, especially when they're interested in, PhD, professional degrees, things like that. Like, you got to really want it, because there are multiple off-ramps for you to take along the way. And if you don't really want it, you will take one. And you don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste your money. So you just really want to make sure that it's something that you really, really, really want to do, that you have that internal drive, that internal motivation. And it's really great at the end. It really is. And it's a real sense of accomplishment. And you will earn it all. It's really good. And it looks like we've got a question that's come in from the chat, and then we'll sort of jump back here, and I promise we will get to funding.
Yes, that's always a popular question. So we do have a question from Desiree, which I think is great, especially for all of you, but definitely PhDs specifically. So as we know, academia is changing. Academic jobs are not as prevalent as maybe they once were. They're much more competitive, and kudos to all of you because you do that great work. But one of the questions is, how can a master's, PhD, JD be applied in the workforce, especially maybe if it isn't a direct correlation, or maybe if they're having a hard time finding a job in academia? Any of you can answer, all of you, whatever.
Well, I'll start, because that's part of what I mean about being informed, right? You have to want to do it, knowing that, I often have people tell me, I want to basically do you, like, I just want to teach in college. You need to know what the different ways of teaching in college are, and which of those options are viable for you, right? And have a realistic sense, right? And plenty of people have a drive to do it based on that realistic sense. By the way, jobs are declining. Tenure track jobs, right, are declining, right? And again, that's what I mean. You need to know about the different kinds of jobs, even teaching jobs. Other jobs are not declining. Also, and Dave should talk to this, right? Academic jobs generally are actually exploding, right? Academia is hiring. It's just not all on the tenure track research teaching model. There's also all sorts of teaching and what I think of as public humanities work, right? And increasingly, we're trying to kind of gear students toward thinking about that. And so I think there are all sorts of opportunities, but again, I think you have to inform yourself. And I also start with this day one with our graduate students, encouraging you from the beginning, even from the beginning of a program or even before you enter it. You always want to be grabbing the opportunities right now, because you're also thinking about down the road. And you're trying to identify different possibilities and seize the opportunity, right? So our GAs, for example, are assigned to all sorts of things, right? That are different possible preparations for different career pathways. I want them to be seizing those opportunities, right? So by looking down the line, even while you're doing that, right?
And from the JD side, you've been hearing people joke, there's too many lawyers, right? We have a lot of personal injury attorneys here in Vegas, but we're a car-centric city, so it makes sense. But I don't think that there's too many lawyers. I think that our lawyers are now distributed across the country. Right? We desperately need legal services in more rural parts of Nevada, right? There's some, I know, like up in Elko, they constantly are recruiting, right? Because everyone wants to live up in the Reno area or here in Clark County. But even like the Central Valley of California, people desperately need legal services, but everyone wants to live and work on the coast. So I don't think there's too many attorneys. I just think they're not in the areas they need to be. But there's other areas a lot that are exploding. You know, one of the big things right now with immigration, right? So you don't have a right to counsel in an immigration case as you do in a criminal law case. So there's desperate services needed there, civil justice, so landlord tenant, right? Housing is important. Family law, if there's any type of domestic disturbance or divorce, I think people need services there. But even from if you get a JD, but you don't necessarily want to practice law, you know, I did practice a little bit, but I enjoy higher ed much more. I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well. So what we call JD Advantage jobs. So jobs where like contracts manager, working for a big tech firm, you have lots of contracts coming through and just assessing them. It takes a legal education kind of assess that and put you in an advantage. A lot of HR professionals now have JDs because the connection between employment law, and that's what I used to do, employment law, and HR professionals. So it's growing. And again, I don't think there's too many attorneys. I just think that they're not in the right areas. And you know, I think naturally we're just a litigious society as well. So I think there's
That's lucky.
I think that lends itself to growing here. And one thing about Boyd is that we're the only law school in the state. So that gives our graduates a great advantage. There are actually more legal jobs here in Clark County than the graduates that we produce. So our employment rate's above 90%. So 10 months after graduation. So that's one thing when I tell students about the opportunities here in Southern Nevada and even Northern Nevada, that they're great. So it's not too many attorneys, but just in the right spots.
I guess I'd like to note that there's a lot that can be done with a psychology or behavioral science degree. And so, for example, you could just be in industry and work on something like product development and assess like how well a product would fit with sort of what's currently needed, in terms of fitting with human behavior, human needs, and all that. You could work for government and be analyzing policies and the effectiveness of policies and how they could be improved. You could be working for a nonprofit to help them understand, like, hey, we have this great service, but how do we get the word out to the people we're trying to reach? And you can do the research to help them do that. If you've had practice writing grants, you can help nonprofits get grants. You can help, and so there's a lot of skills that you obtain that can be applied outside of academia. And that's really what they say is if you're not going to go into academia, don't focus on sort of what you know in your area of study. Focus on the skills you gained from being a graduate student. First off, you're going to have to get really good at time management. And that's really critical to be successful in most high profile positions, right? You're good at sort of gathering literature together and summarizing it. So you're good at you could do that then in an industry, right? What information is here? What do I see a gap in? What do we need to, what is missing with this company, right? And so kind of taking in information and using a lot of the skills you obtained as a graduate student and just applying them in a different way. And that's what they say when you go out in the job market, that's what you focus on is the skills you have versus this area of study that, I know a lot about stereotypes and biases. How's that going to help us? Okay, so how did I get to know about stereotypes and biases and what have I done with them? I hope that helps.
Wow. Okay, those were all such great answers. The JD is looking pretty good. I'm just saying, I don't want to spur anyone.
You can have a career change.
Yeah, I mean, those job odds are pretty great. So I was really, but I think for anthropology, at least for my discipline, is very similar. So just everything that you just heard, I would only add two additional points. One is that for some disciplines like anthropology, so what I do as a biological anthropologist is I'm also a human biologist, which means that I am actively working to cross-train all of my graduate students because the likelihood that they're going to get the job that I have slim to nil. Maybe if they're very lucky. I feel like I won the lottery some days. And I do know that they will be trained and they will have skills with their master's or PhD to go onto the job market in global health with nonprofits. They will have skills that are readily transferable for those. And so we work on that a lot. The other point I would like to make is I would like to encourage you, wherever you end up going to graduate school, to please utilize the programs like what we have here. The programming we have here in the Grad College, it's no secret. I'm a huge fangirl. I love the Grad College, and I always have, and I'm a huge supporter. The programming that's available is remarkable, and students do not utilize it. I'm always just so stunned that more students aren't just, kicking down the door for all the medals and all the just all of the additional training and certificates that you can get. So that's exactly speaks to the point that my colleagues on either side have made. You're picking up skills along the way. You're picking up training. You're picking up all sorts of readily transferable skills in these programs. So be sure to utilize that. And then just as a funny little anecdote, I finished my PhD in the middle of the Great Recession. There were no jobs. I made it on to 3 interviews. So where they're going to schedule your travel and they're going to fly you to the university and you feel like such big hot shot. You finally made it. You call your mom. You tell her, I'm going to Maine, right? Get on the plane. They canceled all 3 jobs. So I didn't have a backup plan. I just wanted this job and this life. I had to really reevaluate what I wanted to do. And I got very lucky. But I interviewed for a job as a corporate anthropologist, a Fortune 500 company in LA. I was offered the job. I didn't take it because it didn't feel like a good fit for me. But I was offered a job as a corporate anthropologist for a big company to come in and assess behavioral dynamics between different people. I really wanted a job with Maytag, believe it or not. They were hiring an anthropologist. And I really wanted that job with Maytag, and I did not get a call back to kind of analyze how people use their washing machines in their home. Who knew, right? I also applied for a job at the UN, and I made it past 1 step. And then UNLV called, and the rest is history. But it just goes to show you, you also have to be flexible. Not only necessarily things might happen that are out of your control, like, I don't know, global pandemics or something like that, may actually change what the labor force is looking for and what the job market looks like. So having all of those skills that you've picked up, I think is a good way to go.
And I just want to quickly add here, believe it or not, I do not have a PhD in recruitment and admissions. We don't make those. My PhD is in 18th century British Gothic fiction. So Halloween's coming, it's a very big time of year for us. But otherwise, I don't get to really hang out and do a lot of that all the time. However, I will say, I have one of those alt-act jobs, right? And those skills, as my colleagues here on the panel have talked about, those skills that I learned as a graduate student are things that I brought with me, that pop up in my resume, pop up on my CV, that get me in the door places for interviews, and that I use each and every single day. Especially, culling together large bodies of research, summarizing things, right? Sort of putting all that together. A lot of the, we do write a lot in English department, so I got a lot of writing skills. And using those as well. So yeah, I would say being aware of what's out there and being aware of sort of how you can leverage your skill set into other things, I think is really, really important. But let's sort of back up a minute. I want to make sure we get to this before we run out of time here. So I have a couple of quick questions, and I know Cameron sort of touched on one of these very briefly, but in terms of like graduate college differing from undergrad, there's not really majors and minor areas of study. There can be concentrations, but generally speaking, one of the great things about grad school, right, is you get to do all the stuff that you really care about. You get to do all the stuff that you enjoy the most. So I did want to make sure that we touched on that really briefly, but I want to make sure we kind of get to the big question, which has to do with how do we get this grad school thing paid for, right? Funding, scholarships, fellowships, availability of these things. So Cameron, if it's okay with you, we'll start with you, and we can maybe talk about this in terms of like, there is money available for graduate students, but like, how do those decisions get made, in terms of at the law school, and then we'll sort of go down the line here and learn about how it kind of happens in grad school too.
Sure, yeah, so law school is expensive.
He's leading with that.
Yeah, it's expensive. So in-state students, it's about $27,000 a year, 3-year program. So that's tuition only. So out-of-state's 12,000. Yeah, and we were very affordable compared to our peers, especially in California. They're about double. Our public peers, even more than double. But every applicant to our law school will assess you for admission, and then separately, if you're admitted, our admissions committee will also assess you for scholarships. Money you don't have to pay back. The law school has a fund where we would assess the student based off of 2 important numbers: your high LSAT score and your undergraduate cumulative GPA. Oftentimes we have applicants who say, well, can I use my graduate degree GPA to boost it? And we're not able to do that. We can't. You know, they try often, but it's something that our reporting authorities don't allow us to do, to report a graduate GPA. So those 2 numbers will, if they're competitive, and our competitive numbers change every cycle, but if they're competitive for that particular cycle, the law school will award you a scholarship that is guaranteed for all 3 years at a certain dollar amount, anywhere from a quarter tuition to full tuition. So we do have students who law school is completely paid for. They only usually take out loans for their living expenses, but that's a deal. I think it's a great deal. And even students who don't get a scholarship, Boyd is still a very affordable law school. $27,000 a year sounds like a lot, but compared to a lot of other law schools, especially out on the coast, we're very affordable. So we do have opportunities to be a research and teaching assistant for your 2nd and 3rd year. It doesn't pay much, but it's a way for you to have maybe some grocery money for the month or something like that. And then a lot of our students do get paid summer jobs. So they would work their 2nd or 3rd year, mostly during the summer, but sometimes even during the school year, where they're making a good salary to help support themselves.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things we recommend is that students apply for a graduate assistantship when they apply to our program. And our department very much focuses on our 1st and 2nd year students, ensuring that they get a graduate assistantship, that they're our priority. And so one nice thing about a graduate assistantship is that it covers tuition, and so, which is huge, right? So you're getting much of your costs of graduate school paid for. As you get further along in the program, you can continue to have some sort of GA-ship. So you can be a part-time, you can be like you get a teaching GA-ship, for example. So we often, starting with our 3rd year students and on, teach courses, and then they get paid that way. And then they also get experience teaching. And one of the really nice things that our department does is we actually have a teaching of psychology course for those students. So the whole cohort goes in, they're instructed at how you teach, introduction to psychology. And then they have support with one another, which is lovely, because I know the first time I taught, I was thrown into an 88 student lecture hall with no training. So it's very nice that our department does this for our students, and it shows. So there's those options. The Graduate College also has wonderful fellowship and scholarship opportunities available, funding that you can get during the summer to carry out your research. These open up October 1st and they go through December 1st to apply for. And they vary somewhat about, where you are in your stages, but as you get to be like a more senior graduate student, some of the like presidential fellowships and some of those scholarships that cover, pretty much what you would be paid as a GA. And then you can just focus all on your research if you get one of those. And I just encourage individuals to apply for funding every year, because it's a really good habit to get into. And when you do apply, remember that your panel could be consisting of someone from psychology, anthropology, the law school, English, health sciences, they could. And so you need to make it clear
When you're applying for like big graduate college fellowships, not like.
So when you're applying for these scholarships, you need to make it clear what question you're answering and why it's important for a broad audience.
We've sat on those panels.
And so, and there's obviously financial aid that you can apply for as well to the government, right? And so there's a variety of options to help cover the expense of graduate school.
Okay, I'd like to talk about external funding. So I think that really covered well what you can do in terms of internal funding with a graduate assistantship. Not all programs have enough graduate assistantships to go around to all of the students who they're accepting. So one of the very first questions that I would encourage all of you to ask when you are communicating with whoever that is on the other end of the computer about a graduate program is to specifically ask about funding opportunities so that you know whether or not you have a good shot. Sounds like psychology is pretty great and they have a lot of opportunities. That's great. You want to know that, you know, when you're starting out. In terms of external funding, sometimes professors have big grants from NEH or so National Endowment of Humanities, from National Science Foundation, from National Institutes of Health, big funding bodies, and they have research money that includes funding for graduate students. Sometimes professors have that. So if you're in communication with a particular researcher, they may let you know about that. They may choose to fund you on one of those lines. Often when you're starting out, there are very limited opportunities outside of internal funding from the universities. But I'm assuming, is everybody here an undergrad? I should have asked you that first, Dave. Okay, so you're very lucky. You're in a great position. You're sitting very pretty right now because you have an opportunity to apply for something called an Nsfgrfp. We talked about this yet in programming? So the Nsfgrfp you are eligible for your senior year at a university, and before you get your master's degree.
If you're in science.
If you're in science, well, or many social sciences, so psychology, anthropology, there's one other. Sociology, so it depends, so what would work for English or law? But for this table, for this table here, this table right here, it would work. And you can apply for this, and what you do is you essentially apply as your own individual independent person, but you apply to have a mentor at the graduate institution where you want to go. And they help you with your application. It's very competitive, it's ultra competitive, but we're feeling pretty good at UNLV this year because we got 2 Nsfgrfps for the first time ever. So we're feeling pretty excited. And one of them was an anthro, and I helped her with her proposal. We worked on that sucker for 18 months without a break. So it's really hard, but they have those monies available, and they have additional monies available for institutions like UNLV that are EPSCoR serving institutions, that are minority serving, Hispanic serving institutions. So if you're interested, shoot me an email. I can give you all sorts of information about the GRFP. The Dean of the Honors College here at UNLV is unbelievably knowledgeable and has actually sat on the panel multiple times. So there's ways for you to do that to get a little bit of funding. And finally, you should also be thinking about how to fund your research externally. And this is out of STEM. This is just in general. There are external funding bodies. I'm assuming for English, perhaps, maybe, mayhap. All right, I'm going to wait for. We'll wait on that one. But for many disciplines, you can fund your doctoral program, your doctoral research with research grants. So also, if there are opportunities for grant writing, which I know UNLV Grad College has great opportunities for teaching you how to do grant writing, try to get in on that early, pay attention, sit up and listen, because you are learning the basic building blocks of seeking external funding, which can also function as a skill that you build later in life if you don't go into a traditional job in higher ed. People are always looking for grant writers. If you know how to write a grant, just saying, that's a great skill.
Okay, is there time?
Absolutely. there
So I
is.
just to back up, so the most common, because I just want to back up and make kind of an umbrella point. The most common ways to fund graduate education, not law school, not professional schools, but graduate education, right, are fellowships or graduate assistantships. Those are the 2 most common ways. Fellowships usually don't have responsibilities. Sometimes they do, but often they don't, right? And they would cover not only tuition, but again, a stipend. Money toward living. Similarly, graduate assistantship should offer at least partial, if not complete tuition, plus a stipend, some kind of credit. Look, especially when we're talking about terminal degrees, I'll just speak the humanities. You shouldn't go to graduate school. I'm just gonna say that, unless you get it pretty much covered. right?
I
Your
second that.
fellowships or graduate assistantships, you shouldn't be going. You should not go with that.
I second
I
that.
mean, you're gonna, you may have to take loans to supplement and so on. But anyway, I just want to say that, because it's helpful when someone said that to me. Because you really shouldn't be paying for this. Okay, so you want to be getting funding, and usually it's one of those two. Again, it works differently at different institutions. So that's why you want to be very careful to investigate. How is it a graduate assistantship? Is it a fellowship? What are the responsibilities that come? What exactly does it cover? What exactly is the stipend? What do you need to pay out of that stipend? Also, as you've already seen, different programs are going to differ in terms of whether they're guaranteeing you that GA-ship for X number of years or semesters, or whether it's competitive. Programs will also differ. Some of them, everybody gets the same package. Some of them, only some people get funded. And some programs, some people get fancy fellowships and some people, right? So you just want to know about that. And those things also contribute to, not just the quality of your life, but also what it is. So I just wanted to say something basic, very basic.
And I should say our department never actually guarantees it, but we've had a good track record. So it's kind of like the unwritten.
Hey, do I have time to make just one point? that I think
Absolutely.
was so important?
Of course.
I think the other thing that, one more final point that I want to build on that, because that's really so critical. Some people come from families where they may have support from their parents, or they may be in a better financial position where they wouldn't have to do things like take out student loans. And they could, pay out of pocket if they had to. I'll just speak to, I did not come from that family. I came from a family where I had, I was helping to support my own household from the time I was in high school. None of that was coming when I was in grad school. And I wish that somebody had said to me, don't take out student loans, because I did have funding. I did have a GA-ship, but I also fell victim to a lot of predatory lenders. And I am about to be a full professor, fingers crossed, if it all goes well. And I am still paying back my student loans. If I pay back my student loans at the rate that I'm paying them right now, I'm just going to fully self-disclose so that you know I'm not playing. I will finish when I'm 62. So you shouldn't be paying for your advanced degree, I think, in this area. With student loans, I think it's unethical, and I'm just gonna take it one step further, and I think that was wonderful that you said
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I think there may be short, again, we're talking a lot about terminal,
Right.
like PhD and MFA is really broad. You know what I mean? There may be some certain circumstances where a graduate certificate or an MA, right? A shorter term, non-terminal degree, maybe in certain very limited circumstances, it might be worth paying for it, but you want to investigate, you want to ask somebody if that's true. And especially to give the whole exposition. There are some MA programs that are money makers. Right, and they don't actually give in. Anyway, so you just want to ask. You just want to ask people that know, do you know what I mean, about what the expectations are.
Yeah, that's great. Can I ask a law school question?
Sure.
$27,000 a year for X number of years. If you get a JD, let's say at Boyd, are you likely to make that back in your first job so that you can pay off your loan? Because I have a feeling if you are a lawyer, you may be a different situation and you may be able to
You've
pay
gotten
that
that
back.
job in corporate anthropology.
Right, or if I had taken the job in LA, then I wouldn't be paying my loans back until I'm 62, So I mean, these are, life's about trade-offs, right? And I don't think I would have been happy to go to lasted, right? Maybe I would just have lasted long enough to pay back my loans and then bail, but can you speak to that payback for law school?
So I would say there's a reckoning it's going to have on student loans in this country. It's unsustainable, as we know, the student loan debt in this country. And law schools have been under the microscope, producing lawyers and graduates who can pay back their loans in a reasonable amount of time. If you work in big law, in the big cities, they make $200,000 as first-year associates. They do. LA, San Francisco, New York, and smaller markets like Las Vegas, I think they're probably around, I don't know the market too, maybe 140 to 160 is first years here. That's in big law. Not every student gets a big law job, just to be quite honest. A lot of them go to be public defenders and prosecutors and government lawyers, and they just don't make that amount. So there is some debt that students still carry with them. You know, there are employment reports that say our graduates are making this amount of money 10 months out. I don't know if it's accurate, but I don't know if that gives a good context on where these jobs are, right? You know, there are some law schools like Columbia Law School is known for placing graduates in corporate. I mean, they have a ton of corporate lawyers across the world, and they can almost guarantee their graduates because they have that name behind them. But yeah, that's a consideration. Most law students would take out some student loans federally, similar to medical students. Just it's the funding and just the business model of legal education. It's different. Yeah.
Can I just say one more thing? But I do think, I mean, we do have some, especially at the MA level, have some self-money students. We have a couple at PhD level, but they are students who like have, you know, one, they're people who already had careers, and this is actually kind of fun for them. Or they also have jobs, say, at UNLV, right? There are other ways to get tuition covered, like employees at UNLV if they're in certain staff positions. Do you know what I mean? So there are other ways in which the tuition part can be covered. So doing a part-time kind of degree, again, especially at the MLA level, is a very different thing from when we're talking about like the full-on terminal degree of PhD. Yeah, so there are other ways, especially for graduate certificates, or even part-time a PhD degree. And
It's creative. Yep.
I actually know some people at UNLV who run schools.
Yeah. The benefits, and be creative on how you can fund your education. Really, if you're a veteran, take advantage of all the benefits through the federal government. If you are an employee of an institution that has a law school, that has a dental school, that has a medical school, and you're considering it, or one of your dependents is considering it, take advantage of what we call grant aid. It helps us on our scholarship budget.
And that's true at other universities as well, right? I mean, I don't know if it's quite got the coverage that you need, depending on how expensive the school is, but there's so many things. And so there are, so I just want to remind you also those, especially for part-time.
All right, I think we're going to have to call it there. This has been fantastic. I think the big takeaway from this, at least for me, is to be knowledgeable about what you're getting yourself into, to reach out to these graduate coordinators, to these folks, ask questions. It's totally okay to do that. So let me thank our panel, and I'll ask you all to join me in thanking our panel. And this has been great. And stay tuned. We've got another panel coming up in just a couple of minutes. So thanks, everybody.
All right, so as we wrap up, we have 2 more scholarships to give away. Also, if you're wondering great ways to fund graduate education, there actually is on our next panel someone that got a PhD in sociology and worked full-time and had her tuition coverage. So I'm sure she can talk about that. But anyway, so our 2 scholarships for the 11 o'clock are going to be Andrew Kim on Zoom. Congrats, Andrew. And Amanda Jorge in person. So please come see Malika Bella to get your scholarship. Our next session will be starting in about 5 minutes. There's snacks in the room next door if you want to donate, chips, and we'll be back in a couple minutes.
Oh, the on-air.
Thank you. You guys are awesome. Thank you.